Welcome to Moments with Marianne. Allow me to interrupt your train of thought with something that may be one of the most interesting things you hear today. This is Marianne Pastana, and our special guest today is Susan Ashford, and she's here to share with us her new book, The Power of Flexing: How to Use Small Daily Experiments to Create Big, Life-Changing Growth. Have you ever considered what your life can look like if you changed your behavior, developed soft skills, and achieved personal and professional growth through a series of small experiments called flexing? This show is for anyone who's looking to be their personal best. Susan is a well-respected leader on the topic of change, management, and organizations. She's the chair of the Management and Organization Group at the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. As an award-winning scholar, she's published papers in the top journals that cover areas of leadership development, leadership effectiveness, and middle management voice. Her work has been published in all the top journals in her field, and she's been recognized with 2 Lifetime Achievement Awards. So let's welcome to the show, Susan.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I love talking about these ideas.
There's so much great information in this. And it's interesting. I think it's a timely book,
You know, so many people have said that to me. And, when you write a book, it's kind of a long process. So, you don't know, when it's going to come out. And then who knew we were going to have a pandemic? And then who knew we were going to be starting to go back, sort of. And who knew the world would feel so overwhelming? But people have said, this is so timely. And I always ask them, why do you say that? And I've gotten really interesting answers.
Oh, I bet you have. My goodness. I took away from the book that we're going through this really difficult time in history. And I think people need kind of to find their North Star and how do we manage this? How do we navigate through, the changes that are happening today? And I felt your book offers just a real fresh perspective that we could all use.
I love that you got that out of it, because I really think that the ideas in the book are both useful to anyone, could pick it up and use it as a person, but I would love for businesses to sort of see a different path for developing leaders, developing their people than the one they've been following. The way businesses develop leaders is really strange, and they spend a lot of money worldwide on it, but they tend to hive off a top percentage, top 15%, maybe 20%, and they say, you are our high potential people and we're going to invest in you. And what seems strange about that to me is that it leaves out of the equation 80% of your workforce. It kind of gives a message to them, not you. We don't see much in you worth investing in as far as leading. And, we have a world that's getting more dynamic, more complex, more uncertain. And I think we do need more leaders in more places, but we've just told them no. And then there's even some research that suggests that organizations don't get it right. They don't even pick the right 20%. They miss people who would grow on to be great leaders, and they include people that kind of aren't that great as leaders. So it's a weird system that we're very invested in. We're spending lots of money on, when I think there's so much power in a different way of doing it.
Oh, I would agree with you 100%. I mean, I can remember when I was working in insurance, I was with them for 6 months and they're like, oh, you're doing so good. Now you're a district manager. And I had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah.
You had to work through it. And it's interesting because when you look at people, I mean, everyone, I believe, has a potential to be a leader.
Yeah, I have a colleague who, Krishna Savani, who's actually studying that very mindset. He thinks that people differ in that belief. Some people believe everybody could be a leader, and other people believe, oh no, it's a special something, and there's only a few. And, I think when we look at our really great leaders that often get held up in courses on leadership, it's like, sure, You're probably not going to be Martin Luther King or Mahatma Gandhi. But our leadership needs are much broader and often much simpler than the amazing things they did.
That's interesting. You often hear in these type of environments where, management saying, hey, we want you to be like X person or this person, instead of really looking at the strengths that other people have on their team and really developing those to the best way that they can.
Exactly. I mean, there's a wonderful TED Talk from a guy, Drew Dudley, who basically says, we have made leadership into something so special and so elevated that most people really do think it's not me. And we ignore the everyday acts of leadership that people are doing all the time. The small ways in which, the principal of the school isn't a great leader, but the science teacher down the hall, she really has great ideas and is able to bring people together around them. And, if the world is getting more complex and more uncertain, we need more people like that science teacher throughout our organizations to make things go and make an organization dynamic and able to change.
Oh my gosh, we so need our teachers. It's not even funny. You
Mm.
know, Before I go too far down the road here, I would love for you to share with us what you mean by flexing, because I found your book to be so impactful, but I think our listeners want to know too.
Yeah, thanks. That is my most common question. So maybe it's a little opaque on the title page. I think there's two ways of thinking about it. One is what we were just talking about. There are more flexible ways to go at leadership development in organizations than what we have done to date, ways that capitalize on where people want to grow anyway and help support them in that growth rather than sending them off to a class to learn stuff we've predetermined that they need. And I think that if we learn this process of flexing and then build supports around it in our organizations, leaders would develop more quickly and more flexibly. So that's one way in which I mean flexing. The other way is that, this is a flexible approach. You can pick this up when, let's say, you have a challenging experience coming up. And we know from research that people learn the most from those challenging experiences about how to be a good leader. But you also could use it to learn about you and some issue that might be on your mind about you and your leadership. So people have talked to me about all sorts of things. I want to learn to be a better listener. I want to learn to be more influential. I want to learn to be more approachable. And you could work on that within that challenging experience. If you don't have anything coming up, you could put the whole system down and not think of it, only to pick it up again when you have another challenging experience coming up. So it's flexible in that way. And then the third way is that one of the practices that I talk about in the book is running experiments, running small trials, little bets that you make on things you want to try to change your leadership or just to be more effective generally. And so that is kind of a flexible approach. It's kind of a trial and error and try again approach rather than a monolithic, I need to go into therapy for 2 years and go to, a 18 module change course, that kind of thing. It's more flexible in that way.
Now, these are principles that people can use in their daily life, right? Like parents and leaders in the community.
Exactly right. These set of ideas grew out of my work helping people to grow their leadership. I'm in a business school. We are training leaders. And so that's what I was spending my time on. In the process of writing the book, though, it became very clear that there's nothing unique about these practices that would help just leaders and not other people who want to grow. And so the focus of the book was really broadened to be anyone who wants to grow. And I mean, grow your personal and interpersonal effectiveness, kind of those soft skills. There's a lot of other ways people grow that this book doesn't relate to as directly, like If you want to learn how to make sourdough bread, there's probably a more direct path. But if you want to learn how to be a more effective sibling or parent or community member or, more influential in your church, this book really does have a lot to say, and it's very empowering. It's a system that people feel like, oh, okay, now I know I can do things. One of the reasons that people told me this was such a timely book is, we've all been so overwhelmed by the huge things facing us, the pandemic, climate change, politics, the social movements that are going on. And they feel like so huge that people feel like, I can't do anything about it. This is a set of ideas that sort of says, oh, that I can do. It breaks it down so that it's something you can do and use in your everyday life or in your work life.
I think that's very inspiring for a lot of people, knowing that they can make changes. And I love how you talk about, you're doing small daily experiments and changes. It doesn't have to be some big, huge thing.
Right, exactly. It might help if I told you a story of someone who wanted to change and what he did. Would that help?
Yeah. I'd love to hear that.
Okay, so there was a person in the book. It was a pseudonym. I named him Simon, and he worked in a very people-oriented company. But around the time that he was starting to lead a major task force, he heard from someone else that somebody had called him formidable. It was like one too many times he had heard that word describing him. And, he's working in a very people-oriented company. This is not a good label in his mind. And so he decided that he wanted to work on becoming a bit more approachable to other people. And so he had this task force that was starting up, and he said, okay, I'm going to work on it during that. It was 9 months long, that task force. And so that was his goal. And that's one of the practices, which is setting a goal that's fairly specific about how you want to grow. And then trying to figure out what you could do to grow in that. So he decided on 3 very simple things. One is he decided he was going to get to the meetings early so that he could greet everybody when they arrived. That way, they feel more connection to him and he would be more approachable with their ideas, etc. His usual way was to wait until it basically was the time for the meeting to start and then dash over and come in and everybody's already there sitting around the table and go right into the task. That didn't increase his approachability. The second thing he decided to do was to sit on the side of the table, not the end of the table, the power seat, because he wanted to reduce his power so that some of the junior people on the committee would feel like they could speak up more and approach him if they felt a concern. And then the third thing to do was the simplest, but probably the most important. It turns out that he had his resting face was probably not as bad as the one that gets amplified in the media, but it was a solemn, serious resting face. And so no one knew he was actually a likable, easygoing guy. And so his third experiment was just to smile more. And so he tried those 3 things to see if he could make progress on this goal of being more approachable. And he did other steps, other of the practices that we talked about in the book. But those are the experiments he tried.
Oh my gosh, I love that because it really gives a new perspective on how we can approach things. And, as you're, writing your book and working with the people, because I know you're so highly respected, are you finding like one of the areas people get stuck is really those interpersonal relationships?
It's a variety of things that people want to work on, but usually they stem from the job of interacting with other humans. We have a saying here, this would be easy if we didn't have to do it through humans. It's humans are difficult, that we rub up against each other, sometimes in a way that meshes, sometimes in a way that doesn't. Another person I interviewed realized that her emotional expressions were really getting in the way in team meetings. So she would be excited, but she would be so excited that no one else felt like they could get excited. It's like that real estate was already taken by her. Or if she was negative and she would express it, she would have emotion about it. And then really someone felt really uncomfortable saying, well, maybe it would work, because she sort of overwhelmed people with her emotions. So that's a really good example of an interpersonal one. And she set the goal of just trying to temper her emotional expressions so that other people could have them and express them. But other people's, there's another one that might be helpful for people to hear. It was a small business owner owned an inn in the wine country. And she, like, one of the places people get their goals is from their fantasies of the future. So like, I fantasize a future Sue that's organized, less stressed, very present, in a way that I can't always be in my present. And so she got her goal that way. Her goal, she was going to sell the inn. And that's a huge deal. But she had been through 2 fire seasons where the whole town was evacuated and a pandemic. And she finally decided, I just can't keep going with this. I'm going to sell the inn. But it was complicated. But her goal was to be organized and proactive. Okay, that was her goal. So it really didn't involve other people too much. But what happened was every time she would run into something where she didn't know how to do it, she would get stymied. And it would just go on the next day's to-do list and the next week's to-do list. And time was passing by. And she really wanted to sell the inn. And so she set the goal of taking action on my to-do list, even if I don't know what I'm doing. And one of her experiments was count learning about it as part of the doing, because she always discounted learning about it. She's learning about the tax codes and the county ordinances and some of the family dynamics. And, so she finally was able to set that as a goal and make progress. And she did get that inn sold, but she really had to set an intention, one of the practices, and then sort of figure out some experiments to try with respect to those.
Well, gosh, that is such a great thing because I know, I mean, I've done this, and this is one of the points in your book that really kind of struck home for me is, it's easy to procrastinate. You get so busy, everything's going on. It's like, oh, that's going to go on tomorrow's list. And then tomorrow ends up being a month,
Right.
So,
I talked to a group of financial planners, and they said, oh, we have this one all the time with our customers. Everybody's always going to do financial planning, but it's so anxiety laden that they keep putting it off, so they don't jump in ever.
Yeah, I can understand that. But I think your book really offers a path for people to look at life and just approaches differently. And, my goodness, I was so impressed with how you talk about interpersonal skills and how we need to take responsibility for our growth. What if we're working with somebody that's like, they could care less? They don't want to take any responsibility.
You're working with them or they work for you?
Well, let's say they work for us. What do we do then?
Okay, so if they work for you, I think there has to be some room for them to grow, some help for them to grow. But growth, if you believe that the ways in which they don't care are hurting the team or hurting the company, I think it needs to be put squarely on their agenda. That not growing under those conditions where the way you're acting is actually hurting. You're interacting with customers in a way that's ineffective, or you're creating coordination problems across teams or on a team. It's got to be put on their agenda. And so if you're the boss, that is squarely your job to insist on growth and give them room, give them help, give them guidelines. And in fact, that's why I asked you, are you the peer or the boss? Because if you're the peer, you're really hoping the boss will do that, right? That's why I think it's so much has to be their responsibility, because everybody, it's hurting the whole system and can't go on. And, if growth doesn't happen, there has to be a path towards, not that this isn't the best place for that person to work. There might be other environments where the exact way they are and are comfortable being fits much better.
Yes, you always hear about how the water evens out. There's some place for everybody.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Well, in your book, you talk about experience. You just start off chapter 1, experience is the best teacher, but only when you flex. And I'd love for you to expand on that for our listeners.
So the idea comes from how leaders report that they develop. So long ago, this isn't a new idea. People did research where they asked people who had both gotten to high levels in an organization and were seen as highly effective, because those things aren't always true. They don't always go together. Some people get to a high level and people just tolerate them. But these were really effective leaders. And they asked them, how did you learn what you needed to learn to be such a good leader? And they said that 70% of what they felt they learned that was super important came from their experiences. 20% came from other people, and that might be people you observe, like, as a role model, like, or people that are actively involved in your life, mentoring you, etc. And so this started a whole wave within business where businesses, again, following that approach that we labeled as somewhat ineffective, they said, this is great. We'll take our high potential people, those top 15 to 20%, and we will put them in experiences. And they said, academia, tell us what those attributes are of experiences that help people learn the most. So academia went out and surveyed and found this out and identified the characteristics. And so now the companies were just running around putting people into those kinds of experiences. Again, still leaving off, 80 to 90% of the people. So from that insight, which is, wow, we learn a lot from our experience. A colleague and I started writing about how that can't be so simple. And what we observed is that it ignores the person. It acts as if the experience inherently teaches, but experiences don't inherently teach. The person has to want to learn. And we ended up arguing in the way this work got started, the person has to go about that learning in a particular way to get what they really most need out of that experience. So that's why I think experience is such a great teacher, is it's been documented to help people to learn the kinds of things that go along with being personally effective and being interpersonally effective. But only if they go about it in a certain way that I ended up labeling flexing, only if they flex.
I just love that. Really kind of gets to the core issue, I think, a lot of times with how people are being perceived. And it's so interesting. I really appreciate that you have this chapter that talks about our mindset. How does that relate around experience?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of research that talks about how the mindsets that people bring to achievement situations. And it was first studied in school, so we know what those achievement situations are. But I would say in our world, it would be challenging situations, whether a challenging situation at work or a committee at church that's completely going wrong, or a challenging child rearing situation where you really don't know what to do. So the research showed that people bring one of two mindsets, or they're on the continuum between one of two mindsets. And one starts from the mindset start from the belief that you have about ability. And the belief ranges from what's called an entity belief. And that is, you believe ability is fixed. Some people are born with a lot, some people are born with less. So you can see how this relates to intelligence. We often think, this kid was born smart and this kid not so much. The other belief is an incremental belief. And it is the belief that I can grow and develop with effort, with strategies, and with feedback from others. I will get better. And so the first research looked at how having one of those two beliefs would affect your work in school, but it's since been expanded to look at other things. And I think it's very relevant for growing your personal skills, because how you look at achievement situations either allows you to see feedback and see ways to grow, or it prevents you from seeing it. So if you have a entity belief, which produces a fixed mindset, you think ability is fixed, you tend to go into situations with what we call a performance prove mindset. All you want to do is prove that your amount of ability is enough. You're always about showing how good you are. You're about avoiding ever looking like you're not that good. And you're about trying to show that you're better than other people. Well, if that's your mindset, you're really not attending to where maybe you need to get better, where maybe someone else is role modeling a perfect thing for you to emulate, because you're focused on showing. If you're on the other end, and by the way, when the researcher published the book on this, the researcher is Carol Dweck, and when she published the book on this, she relabeled those beliefs a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. So if you have a growth mindset, you're more about the learning, and you're more willing to put yourself into situations where you may not be perfect, but you think it'll enhance your long-term learning. And it's not that the learning orientation people don't want to perform well. They do. Everybody wants to perform well. It's just that they go at the situation differently. I always imagine the performance prove orientation person having this sort of clenched jawed, clenched fist. I'm going to get in there and I'm going to prove I can do this. Very tense way of going at the situation. Whereas the learning orientation, you're going to go in there and you're going to prepare and you're going to perform and you're going to try and do as well as you can, but you're going to be open to somebody maybe doing it better than you, and you're going to be open to seeing what there is to learn. And so the mindset really impacts what you're going to get out of experience. So you're going to miss some of that 70% of the possible learning because you're going to be too busy proving that you already know everything.
Is it usually when people are in this state of proving that there's some emotional thing there that they need to kind of resolve or work through in some way or form?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is anxiety about, am I good enough? Which is just a basic, human existential anxiety we all have. Do I matter? Am I good enough? And am I going to make it? And we've been reinforced in that proving mindset through the whole school system. Now, school systems are really trying to change this right now. Carol Dweck's work, the growth mindset, it's all permeated the school system. People's kids now say to them, "Dad, that was a fixed mindset comment." They're telling their parents. But most of us that are adults now didn't go through school like that. So we were really reinforced in it. And life is competitive, right? Only a certain number of people get into school, certain number of people get jobs, certain number of people get promotions. And so we feel like this way that this thing that's gotten us this far is the necessary thing to get us where we are going next. But the research shows something different. They show that, either of these mindsets work fine for simple tasks and work fine for tasks that don't require a lot of ability. But when you get to more complex tasks and tasks for which your ability is less well known, a learning mindset makes you a much better performer. So I always tell my students, which describes where you're going, right? So they can see it really clearly then. They're going into a part of life where it's less certain. You don't get Scantron tests where you fill in bubbles and get a grade. It's much less certain, just how to perform well. You need to have an openness to learning if you're going to survive. And it's certainly true as you move up in organization.
Thank goodness we have young people teaching us, right?
I love that. Yes.
Yeah, but now we've got your book, so people can read this and really gain an understanding of how they can make these changes. And I was thinking, overall, when we look at leadership, I mean, is it risky to be a leader?
Oh, I'm so happy you asked that. I have such a funny relationship with this idea. So I totally believe that it's risky to be a leader. But I'm interested in leadership from people who hold formal positions in organizations and leadership from everybody else. So I'm interested in when the science teacher steps up and leads. But we haven't talked about it very much in the writing on leadership. Risk isn't really mentioned. So colleagues and I published a paper on this, and we identified 3 prominent risks. One, people worry about, so therefore they see risks in whether they're going to cause interpersonal problems. They're going to rub somebody the wrong way. Maybe somebody else wanted to lead as well, and so it's going to be competitive. They also worry about their image. Maybe even if you're not rubbing anyone the wrong way, you might screw it up, and you might look bad. You might look foolish. You might look naive. You might look too young. So interpersonal image. And the third risk we called instrumental, which is there's a risk in just saying, let's go down path A, not path B. Because what if path A doesn't work? And everybody knows you're the one who said, let's go that direction. And so you see people shy away from leadership all the time, I think. For example, when I ask my students, have you ever had a manager who didn't lead? And I'm asking executive students, all the hands go up. They've all seen this. So somebody who has the formal position of leader, but doesn't actually really lead. And then we talk about in organizations how people are afraid to lead all the time. And I'm saying this so strongly because it's kind of funny. I went to one of our publications that publishes practitioner-oriented pieces. And I pitched this piece on risks in leadership. And they wrote back saying, we don't think our readership will be interested because they don't see it as risky. Everybody wants to lead all the time. Wow. And I'm like, okay, maybe, but that's not what I'm seeing. So I think there are risks. And I think that to grow as a leader, then I've asked you to take a risk. I've said, okay, take a risk, engage in some of these small experiments. But the point about them being small experiments, tiny bets, is, it's not a huge risk. I've taken a monolithic risk of lead more, if I just tell you to lead more, to identify something where you want to get better, and then try some small things to get there. And so I think this approach minimizes the risk a little bit.
I'm sure they're going to be calling you up in 6 months asking for that article, At least they should be, because I think this is such an important discussion to have, because I think a lot of times people just, you got promoted, you're a leader. And, you talk about this in your book, and I'm kind of, freelancing here, but it's really kind of at a point where, we get these people who are put in positions of leadership and they just don't know what they're doing or how to move forward. And so the people that they work with are really kind of, in many ways, like the guinea pigs to get there.
Yeah, it's hard. The executive education program I run is called Emerging Leaders, and it's really for that population. And they're a super interesting population because clearly they're very talented. That's how they got that promotion. But also clearly they're in waters that they don't totally understand. And they are really hungry for ideas about both the skills of leadership, but also the mindset. And I think it's really an identity you need to adopt as well, so that you're thinking about yourself that way.
Yeah, kind of because you do need to carry yourself in a different way when you are considered a leader in many ways.
Yeah, both carry yourself and also what happens if you're not keeping leading on your agenda, on your mind, you fall back into doing the work of your subordinates, right? So if now you supervise a bunch of coders, you fall back to, oh, let me just sit down and do it, and you're doing the coding rather than being the real leader they need. And that is your comfort zone, right? So it's easy to fall back into. So Ari Weinswag, who's the CEO of a company here in Ann Arbor called Zingerman's, which is a deli that now has a worldwide presence. And now it's a whole, company of all different businesses. He had a great analogy that might be useful here, and it would be, I always teach it. And he said, when you get that promotion, you now are the beekeeper, not the bee. And so I asked my students, I went online, I got a list of what a beekeeper does. And I asked my students, what's the analog for you as a manager? And a beekeeper, like, make sure the environment is free from toxins. The beekeeper, make sure the bees have safety. Make sure, I don't remember all of them, but it's all these things that if you think about it, oh yeah, that's what a leader should do. And then I always end with, what's one thing the beekeeper can't do? Because the beekeeper's a human. The beekeeper can't be the bee. And it's a really important lesson to take away, that leadership is a different thing than just doing the thing that got you there well. And so it does require new learning, and I think it does require some flexing for sure.
Oh, without a doubt, without a doubt. I know you've shared a little bit, and we talked briefly about this earlier. I would love for you to expand on what a flex goal is and what some of those could look like for people.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think of it as just a place where you need to grow, but trying to get to an intention that's relatively specific. So that's what it is. Pretty simply, it's a goal. People come to these goals in a variety of different ways. I told you about the innkeeper who had a fantasy of a future her that was proactive and organized. And so, she developed that goal. And then while she started to work and she realized that the real stumbling block for her was running into places where she didn't know what to do. And so then she honed her goal down to be more, my goal is to keep going even if I don't know what I'm doing. Some people get their goals from pain in the present is what I call it. But, you get feedback that says, you're not clear in your instructions to the team, or, when you speak up, you don't have the influence you need to have in your group with your peers. And so you develop a goal based on that feedback. We also can develop a goal when we recognize sometimes how our past is showing up in our present. So this might be past traumas or past lessons learned. We learn a lot of things before we're the age of 7 or 8 that I say go directly to our hard drive. They're not even in our software, so we're really not aware of them, but they impact our behavior. So one story I tell about this is about myself. And I grew up in a family with 6 kids. And somehow I got the rule that, and I don't even know if it really was a rule. It was certainly not a stated rule, but I intuited this rule that we shouldn't bother mom and dad. right? And it makes sense. They had 6 kids. They were a little overwhelmed. And so one day I was working outside in the garage on my dad's workbench, and he came out and he started helping me. And I vividly remember, I must have been 8. And I vividly remember the anxiety I felt about this help he was giving me, that I wanted to make it go faster. So I didn't bother him very long. I wanted to make it, I kept saying, I got it. And it wasn't, I got it, you're insulting me by trying to teach me. It was really, I got it, you can spend your time elsewhere. So fast forward many years, I'm the school's senior associate dean, an important leadership position. And we get asked all the time, I have to ask people to help me all the time with various things. And one of the things we get asked to do is to evaluate other new programs being proposed at other universities in Michigan. And so I got one of those and I sent it off to the chair of the accounting group. It was an accounting program. And I said, look, we need to evaluate this. It's not that important. Don't spend a lot of time on it. Just give it a glance over and just let me know if it seems okay. I'm living out my childhood. Don't bother anyone too much. And I get a blistering reply back from him that taught me one of the most important lessons about my leadership and told me a place I needed to grow. He said, Sue, it really isn't motivating when you ask someone to help you and then you tell them it's not important, which is so obvious in retrospect. But if you had my psychology, I hope it sort of makes a little sense why I would do it that way. And he said, to ask a bunch of accountants right now to just certify something without giving it much time, given all the accounting scandals that are going on, really is kind of insulting, and we makes us feel like you don't care about ethics. And I'm like, whoa. And so I set an intention to grow, a growth goal. I said to ask for help without minimizing. And I'll tell you, Marianne, it's been hard. Every time I have to go ask someone for help, I find myself wanting to minimize. Sometimes I see it in the email I've written, and I take it out of there and ask for help in a way that affirms the value of what people are going to give me. So these goals can come from anywhere, but they really are things you identify that you'd be a better leader, a better parent, a better sibling, a better community member if you could make improvement on that. That's what you're looking for, because that deficit of mine was really getting in the way of leading well. I didn't want the people who worked for me to not feel valued. So that's the kind of thing.
Well, and you can easily tell from your book that wouldn't be something you would ever consider, but it's interesting because, gosh, that stuff we learned early, it sticks with us forever.
Yeah, it really does.
Gotta work on it, Well, and I know in your book, we haven't even touched the tip of the iceberg with your book. There's so much great information here, but I know you have 7 practices that you talk about. Why don't you share one of them with us?
Okay, I'll share one we haven't talked about, but I think is pretty important. And that is, so I'll share about reflection. So there's an experiment Tim Wilson, a very prominent psychologist, did, and he gave people a choice that psychologists like to give to people. And he said, what should you rather do? Be alone with your thoughts and feelings, or zap yourself with a 9-volt battery? Like, this is a weird choice, right? But that was the choice. And what he found is that the majority, like 65% of men and 52% of women, would prefer to zap themselves and be alone with their thoughts and feelings. So we as a culture, we don't really love reflection. We often will say, I'd like to reflect, but there is just no time. But some leadership theorists and actually a poet, David White, basically said, yeah, we got busy in the first place just so we wouldn't have to spend much time with our thoughts and feelings. So I don't know which came first, but I do know that reflection is kind of important for our growth. So finding time to synthesize what just happened So for Simon, in that committee meeting, he was running that task force, periodically taking time to synthesize. Am I approachable? Are people approaching me? Is this still the right goal for me? Do I need a different goal? What might I do differently to grow in this area? Because if you don't take that time, your experiences just kind of pass through you without you learning much from them. So I think reflection is really important. And the people we talked to did it in a variety of ways. So one person reflects every morning like other people run every morning. Most people don't do that, but he finds it really useful. Another person has a phone call every night with a colleague, a friend of his, and he's told the friend to ask him these 3 questions based on something he's working on. And the friend has 3 questions that he's supposed to ask the friend. And so he reflects every night with a friend. For most people, that isn't what you do. Some people reflect on airplanes when they're traveling. Other people just do it periodically, but it's really important to get it in there so that you really can extract the meaning from the experiences you're having.
Yeah, that way you can learn from what's happening and make those adjustments. And it's interesting. Like most people, they never even consider what happens around them because they're focused on themselves. So this is like a new life skill that many people are having to learn.
Yes, I was talking to a woman who does some life work herself, life coaching work, and she said, well, this is one of the themes that everybody just blames everybody else for everything, and therefore they can't learn and grow. And I go, well, I wish I had talked to you before I wrote the book, because I would have put that in there. Seems like such a great insight. It's not in the book, but that would be another way where we just are oblivious to the learning. We're too busy blaming other people for what's happening rather than looking at how we are contributing to what's happening.
That's like the follow-up book, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Was there any research? Because I know you did so much research with this and you're just so thoughtful in what you put in the book. Was there any research that surprised you?
It surprised me. I guess the research, it's an evolving group of research, but one of the practices is emotion regulation. And the surprise is that from that body of research is that we actually do have some power over our emotions that we don't recognize. We act as if we're at the mercy of our emotions, and therefore we can't learn, or therefore we screw things up, in ways in which we wish we were more effective. But this research really does show ways in which you can get a handle on your emotions so that they're not running the ship. Rather, you're more in charge.
I think that's so important because so many people, appear to be on like just a passenger on a runaway freight train, So.
Exactly. Yes.
Oh my goodness. Well, Susan, I mean, we could talk all day, and we haven't even touched a majority of this book. There's so much great information in here. Where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your work and be part of your community?
Well, it's super easy. It's susanashford.com. We'll take you to my website. On there, you could take a quiz and find out how good of a flexor you are. You can also email me through the website, and you could sign up for a speaking engagement. All of that is on the website. And I love talking about these ideas, and I love talking to people who have an interest in trying to make their lives better. I really think the best thing you could say about someone late in life is they never stopped growing. And I like being a part of helping people to do that.
Oh my goodness, I love that. Well, Susan, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
It was my pleasure.
If you'd like to connect with Susan Ashford and learn more about her book and the work she's doing, visit susanashford.com for more information. There, you can take a dive into the research she's done, including job insecurities, issue selling, feedback seeking, leadership, and navigating the new world of work. If you'd like to learn how efficient you are at flexing in your everyday life, take her free quiz that's available on her website. We'd also like to thank Harper Business for putting forth such an amazing book. You can visit their website at harperbusiness.com for more information. You'll also want to check out the Moments with Marianne book club. There we have listed books in every genre, and you can see our upcoming guests and past guests. I'd like to thank everyone who's taken the time to reach out to us. We value your comments, questions, and suggestions. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.